Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the National Wilderness Coalition, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are going to explore the past, present, and future of wilderness advocacy. My name is Sara Husby, and I am the Executive Director of Great Old Broads for Wilderness. I am proud to say that our organization was tied to the 25th anniversary of the Wilderness Act. That was when we were founded. We were started by 5 ladies who were very feisty, who were pretty upset at former Senator Orrin Hatch for saying that wilderness was not used by the elderly and disabled and that there needed to be roads. And these ladies are like, that's not the case. They were coming off a trail one day and these men were like, look at those old broads. And that is how we got started. Great Old Broads for Wilderness. We are still here. We are still feisty. And we are a group that is being heard, just like so many of you in the room tonight. Thank you for being a voice that wants to be heard, that wants to be an advocate for wilderness. Just last week, it was the 60th anniversary of the Wilderness Act. And this was made possible by so many different visionaries and remarkable efforts within the conservation movement. However, we also want to recognize that there were voices not heard and that there were shortcomings when the Wilderness Act was written, especially when it relates to meaningful relationships and engaging Indigenous people and tribal nations. I want you to know that it's not lost on me, and I'm guessing it's not lost on many of you also right now, that we are gathered and occupied on ancestral lands of the Nukatchunk and the Piscataway peoples. And we need to discuss a landmark piece of legislation that ignores the ancient and ongoing presence of the stewardship of Indigenous peoples. And right now, on the topic that we're talking about called wilderness. The National Wilderness Coalition, we are very committed to working to honor the knowledge and the expertise of Indigenous people, tribal nations, and other communities that have been impacted by environmental injustices. Together, all of us are here to advance solutions and involve shared governance, co-stewardship, co-management, and the protection of cultural landscapes consistent with the Wilderness Act. Now, look around. Who do we have in this room with us today? Well, we have diversity. We have a lot of powerful people who you are the future who are going to affect the Wilderness Act and the wilderness movement. We have congressional staff. We have our agency folks. Hopefully, maybe we'll have an elected official who kind of pops in and listens from the back of the room because they understand how important wilderness is to them also. But we're all here today because we believe wilderness is essential. Thank you for believing in that. We're going to continue to make a difference. So, who is this National Wilderness Coalition? Where did we all come from? A little bit over a year ago, there was a group that got together in Park City, Utah, to raise our hands and say, you know what? Wilderness is still relevant. How do we put this on the forefront of the minds of people in Washington, D.C.? How do we help advocate for those very necessary resources that our agencies need to be successful? That's when we came together. We want to work on prioritizing wilderness and conservation again. We want to address biodiversity. We want to ensure wildland integrity. We want to make sure that we are connecting people with nature. We are having voices who were not heard, part of this in the past, heard now, and helping and being involved in the decision-making processes for our wilderness areas. And we want a healthier future for us all. Protecting our public lands and our wild places play into that. So that's our little spiel before we get started about who we are, how we all got here today. I got to do the boring housekeeping stuff, so just in case anything happens, a few items to note. Bathrooms are just down the hall, so if you go out that way, make a left. It is a all genders bathroom. It's easy to pass. Just go on through those doors, and there it is. We have exits, not that there will ever be an emergency, fingers crossed, but we have 2, just kind of go out if you need to. And for those of you who have been on the Hill with us all week, you will be able to store items here tomorrow in the glass conference room called Acadia. eastern wilderness area, I learned. Is that correct? Someone? Yay. Okay. I got Jean.
Not yet a wilderness.
Oh, it's not a wilderness. We want it as a wilderness, maybe, right? A park? So, obviously, I am not from the East Coast. You can store your items there tomorrow. So your name is still on a list. Just go down to the front desk. They will let you bring your items up and then come back later on to get them when you leave for the day. And finally, we are going to have time at the end for questions. So please hold your questions to the end. Write them down, remember them, and we will be good to go. It is my pleasure that I am sitting up here with 4 passionate, intelligent individuals who are here to share their expertise with you today. I'm excited to introduce to you Roberto Morales. He is the National Outdoors for All Program Campaign Manager at the Sierra Club. We have Skylar Begay, who is the Director of Tribal Collaboration in Outreach and Advocacy at the Archaeology Southwest. We have Megan Huynh, who is Senior Attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center. And this evening, we were supposed to have Troy with us from the Tribal Coordinator with the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance and Bears Ears Partnership and Grand Canyon Trust, but he was unfortunately not able to come. Now, that we wish him best, but we have Mark Maryboy here, who is former SUA board member, founder of Utah Diné Begay, and brings a level of expertise and wisdom that I am excited for him to share with all of you here in the room. So let's get right on in and get these questions going. The first question I have for all of the panelists is an easy one, at least I think it's easy. What is your current role and how does your work intersect with the larger wilderness movement? Mark, you want to start? You're to my left.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Maryboy, as mentioned. One word about the Great Broads of Wilderness. They're a bunch of tough girls. I have an opportunity to visit their office in Durango, Colorado every now and then, and always trying to figure out a way to take down the fences so the cows won't be roaming all over the place. So that's one tough job that they're working on. As far as the question's concerned, I was introduced as a former member of SUA, a former member of Diné Begay. I step away from all of these groups because I have started a business and that requires my total concentration to create opportunities for Native Americans, and right now it's probably 0.1% Native Americans that are successful in running their own business. So I've taken on the role to show my people that we can do it, and we're just as good as everybody else. So that's what I'm doing. But I keep coming back to conservation good, wilderness, and things like that. And I have a great passion for it, and I've done a lot of work on it in the past. And it's just like the saying goes, you can take a monkey out of the jungle, but you cannot take the monkey out of the jungle. So that's the way I am, and wilderness is a tough issue. It deals with Mother Earth, that's what we say. It deals with, in our culture, Native Americans, we talk about ancient sites, cultural sites, paleontologies, all those things, herbs, the sun rays, and I'll talk about this more later on, but basically that is my understanding of how wilderness is viewed by most Native Americans.
Thank you. Skylar?
Good evening. I'm Skylar Begay.
I'm Director of Tribal Collaboration at Archaeology Southwest, as they said. And Archaeology Southwest is a nonprofit based in Tucson, and a lot of our work takes place on public lands and also on tribal lands. And a lot of these places where we do our work happens also to be wilderness or a national park or a national monument or a national forest that might have wilderness within it. And of course, indigenous peoples have lived on these lands for thousands of years. And a lot of those lands now are wilderness or some other designation protected places. So in many ways, our organization is often involved in protecting those places, helping to document them so we can get a baseline of what we know is there, and we can sort of keep track if things are getting damaged or stolen or vandalized. And then a big part of our work also is working with tribes and indigenous communities to get them out there or to support them if they want to protect the place. And then even if there isn't a material legacy in the form of archaeology on lands, we're aware, and I'm aware, that these places, which may be wilderness, are often considered sacred landscapes to indigenous peoples for other reasons, like Mark mentioned, as places where people hunted or did ceremony or collected medicine. So we sort of acknowledge that as well, that even if we don't see a material legacy on the ground, that doesn't mean that there weren't people there necessarily.
Thank you. Roberto or Rob?
Rabo. So as the Outdoors for All campaign manager, the role essentially is to manage campaigns that, the Transited Trails campaign, which is the priority for us, being that transportation is one of the biggest barriers for low-income communities of color to access public lands, and to introduce them right to wilderness areas through Nearby Nature. That's another program that we have, which is Philadelphia ICO, which is Inspiring Connections Outdoors, Detroit Outdoors, and the LA San Gabriel Mountains Nature for All Coalition. And through that coalition, and I think throughout all of these three programs mentioned, it's the emphasis on leadership development, specifically for youth. Getting youth into wilderness areas as a priority, and working with partners that are also working to create that experience, right, a transformational experiences that the wilderness can bring. And that's something that we do see definitely as a priority in our programming. There are challenges. I think, the partnerships that we have gathered, like in Yosemite with Nature Bridge, for example, one of the few organizations that is really specifically devoted to getting kids to connect to wilderness areas in Yosemite. I wish that there were more of those, right? And that's one of the challenges, I think, in the last 10 years of seeing this work, that there hasn't been that much programming specifically for wilderness areas, right? And I think if we look at priorities to develop leaders, it is about that backpacking experience that you have in the Sierras, at least for us in California, right? Like that is just the majestic, the beauty of the Eastern Sierras that I think captures your soul, but also connects kids to nature at a different level. So in my experience, I have seen kids from urban areas after a 5-day backpacking trip come back and be deeply connected to nature and want to do more, in the sense of, getting a career in the environment, joining a community garden, or even wanting to backpack, right? But I think that's the reality of it, that once a youth coming from a low-income community wants to continue doing this, we just don't have enough organizations that have those services available for them. And so that is something that we wish we could have more of, and I think that the movement needs to really prioritize for the next 10 years.
Thank you. Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Huynh. I am an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and within SELC we work in a 6-state region throughout the Southeast. I'm actually located in our Georgia office, and so do a lot of Georgia-specific work. Have worked with the Cumberland Island Wilderness Area, and recently, in the last several years, have spent a lot of time working with the Okefenokee Wilderness Area. We are working on opposing a proposed titanium mine that is right at the doorstep of the swamp and of the wilderness area, and have a great coalition of folks, including, I know, several folks in this room that have really come together on kind of recognizing how we can support wilderness areas by also paying attention to the threats outside of boundaries and how those are impacting wilderness character within our wilderness areas.
Thank you. So our first individual question is going to go to Rob. Why, how do you build intergenerational relationships with wilderness?
Talking about like prioritizing wilderness areas, I thought about it right now, and it's almost like starting definitely from the grassroots, the base of connecting youth and families to nature to nearby nature, right? Something that ideally could be less than an hour away from you and your community. In the San Gabriels, we do have that access ideally, especially for the San Gabriels that. Communities from South LA, for example, that are burdened by high rates of childhood asthma and diabetes because of the lack of open space and clean air, can actually get to an entry or get to a nice, get to a forest area within less than an hour. And I think the youth and family programming, and specifically getting the families out to nearby nature, the blessing that we have in the San Gabriels that we can do that within less than an hour away. And also, getting them to feel more comfortable about venturing out further. There is the issue with comfort, right? Like the further away you are from your vehicle, then I think folks perceive it as the more dangerous that it gets. And we a lot of the times is about like being a cheerleader for these folks, right? Or like just getting them excited about getting out there and realizing that it's way safer out there than it is in some of the neighborhoods that we work with, right? So, I think it starts there with the basic level of engagement and connection to nature, and having the ability for youth and families to connect, to have the time and the space to connect at their own level, to have that relationship right with the place, and having them, encouraging them to come back and to explore further. Now that sometimes the families could actually do a backpacking trip, but again, going back to the lack of resources, right? There needs to be more of like the gear libraries, which again, I think it's something that is growing. The movement is growing, but 10 years ago, we had very little funding for it. In the city, literally, there was less than 2 gear libraries. So that lack of access just hindered a lot of the programming that we wanted to do as we're building up folks and building up that comfort level. But yeah, I mean, we have Generation Green programs and a couple of programs that working specifically with youth that is about getting folks comfortable, and then the summer trips or the summer cohort would end with a backpacking trip. And after that, there are a lot of leaders that are being developed out of that want to do more and that want to volunteer with us. But I think it definitely starts at the nearby nature level.
Thank you. My next question is for Skylar. You mentioned that you are the Archaeology Southwest Director of Tribal Collaboration and Outreach and Advocacy. Can you tell us here in the room what that means to you and what that actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, sure. It's a very long title to start with, so I just say Director of Tribal Collaboration nowadays mostly. It's a new position for Arc Southwest. I've been in it now for 3.5 years, and I had a counterpart. Her title was Director of Tribal Collaboration in Research and Education. So Arc Southwest does a bunch of different things, and we had 2 directors for that reason. And she has since moved on to another organization, but I'm still in my position. And so over the past 3 years, it's sort of evolved from me just using my lived experience as an Indigenous person and sort of my professional background and education to sort of formalize how Archaeology Southwest goes about our collaboration with tribes. It's not that Archaeology Southwest wasn't including Indigenous peoples or partnering with tribal nations before, but it was done in sort of less formal ways, and maybe in some ways that a lot of mistakes were being made. And so they recognized the need that we really need to start thinking about how to do this in a better way. So my counterpart and I, when we first got started, we wrote what's called a tribal collaboration model. If you're interested in that, you can find it on archaeologysouthwest.org. And it basically lays out some kinship values, what we call kinship values. If you ever hear some indigenous peoples introduce themselves to each other, they often say, this is my clan, this is my mom, this is my dad, this is where I'm from. And through there, like I just found out, Mark and I are related today because of that. And so relationships are very important in indigenous communities. And so we wanted to bring some of that into our work. And so that came in the form of 4 kinship values that we use. And then just some general tips, often from sort of the world of philanthropy and from the work of other indigenous scholars around the country, and sort of just synthesizing it and putting it out in the public so that we're stating our goal and that we're being held accountable by the public and by tribes. So putting it out there and making sure we're standing by it and making sure that the words aren't just words, but that we're walking the walk as well. And so more recently, what that has looked like for the organization is what we're calling a process of decolonization. You might know that in the way that conservation sometimes has a bad history of removal of indigenous peoples across the country, that archaeology has also played its role in colonization of the country. So acknowledging that outright and putting that out there and reconciling it and saying, how do we go from here? How do we be better about this? And so I'm actually making my entire staff and hopefully my board do this decolonization training so that I'm not the only one sort of saying this is why we do things. So establishing that why is really sort of at the core of my job. So that's sort of where we're at right now. And I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to be good. And I hope other organizations will go about that process as well.
Thank you. The resources that you mentioned on your website are definitely ones we'll send as follow-up, and also that I know Great Old Broads will be checking out. You mentioned, I do have one other question for you. For groups like some in the room, including ours, what do we do if we do not have Indigenous staff or we are not Indigenous-led? What do we need to hear as we're approaching this work?
Well, I think you just hire Indigenous peoples, and more importantly, sort of try to do the work to make your organizations welcoming places to attract and retain Indigenous and BIPOC candidates. That's something that we're working really hard to do. And that sounds simple to say, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of intentionality. And it can start with just one, but you should seek that out, because I think more and more what I hear my elders saying all the time is that Indigenous peoples are here and we're capable and we're serious, and so the applicant pool, I think, is getting greater and greater as Indigenous peoples sort of more and more attain higher education and find ourselves in positions of leadership. And so I think the people are out there. You just got to find them and take it upon yourself to hold yourself accountable to a goal.
Great, thank you. Now I have a question for all of our panelists. When the National Wilderness Coalition asked ourselves, why do we still need wilderness? We responded with the idea that the Wilderness Act, is a really good land conservation tool. It can be used to address climate change, protect biodiversity, ensure wildland integrity, and connect people with nature. Which of these do you feel resonate with you the most, and which do you feel resonate with other people you interact with in your roles? Mark?
All of these issues that you mentioned resonate with the people, specifically in the area where I come from, Colorado Plateau. And this is a very difficult issue to deal with, but with Wilderness Coalition and people that are in this room, as long as they recognize that things can be done to deal with climate change on the reservation with Native Americans, the view towards land protection is twofold. One is, when I was growing up, my parents, grandparents were fresh, coming back from the long walk. Kit Carson took Navajos to Bosco Redondo. And for that reason, a lot of Navajos were concerned about the environment, yet they can't do anything. They feel like they would be arrested again. But it wasn't until recently things began to change. I was one of the people that went to university. In one of my class, I had an opportunity to read a book. It was by Edward Abbey, and it was a book written specifically focused on San Juan County, Utah, the Monkey Ranch game. And in 1980, I was elected to a county commissioner, the first Navajo or Native American ever elected to a public office. And you think, wow, but it wasn't wow. The chairman of the commission was the main character that was in the Monkey Ranch game, Bishop Love. He was mean, racist. Every word that he said was son of a bitch. So I had to deal with him, and meeting after meeting, he'd talk about public lands and how uranium oil companies should be invited to explore that land. So when the opportunity arose, he recommended that people, stakeholders, should be invited to submit a proposal to see what we could do with the public lands in San Juan County. And everybody submitted a proposal, but Navajos was not invited to submit anything. But we got together and we put a proposal. And our proposal was somewhat different from the other stakeholders. And we just kind of invited ourselves, and they had maps of how the land should be protected, and ours was different. Most of the stakeholders had 80 or 90% energy and very little conservation. Ours was reverse, 99% conservation and very little energy production. And they just ignored our plan and threw it out. And this is when we began to work with organizations like the Wilderness Society, SUA, and some things that we did not know, we were able to learn those things. And we work with the Secretary of Interior, Sally Jewell, coming here just lobbying to get a national monument. And we thought it was a very difficult task. In 2010, Congress approved our national monument. So that's how the monument came about, the Bears Ears. So the views of the Navajo people, the indigenous people, they finally said, they can't arrest us for planning these things and doing these things. So we're going to go full bore and try to get alignment, and that's how it happened. And today, we see more and more Native Americans, indigenous tribe, proposing different monuments. So we're very happy that we were the pioneer in that area. And thank God to Bishop Love, he pushed me to the point where I had to put something together and make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Skylar?
Yeah, kind of forgot what the question was, just listening to Mark.
I know. Words that really honor what happened with that designation. That was so key in the fight to continue to make sure that it has the management that is being recommended by the tribes, and the agencies come together with you all. We're looking forward to seeing what the final review is of that. Question is, with the priorities that the coalition, have talked about, addressing climate change, protecting biodiversity, ensuring wildland integrity, and connecting people with nature, is there one that really resonates with you and resonates with people in your work?
Yeah, I suppose on a personal level, when I was a young boy and started going to school in Flagstaff, being off the reservation for the first time, seeing my friends go to church on Sundays, I would ask my grandma, I was like, why don't we go to church on Sundays, Grandma? And she would say, because when we step outside, that's our church. We go to church every day. And like, in her simple way, that was how she instilled my sense of connection to the land, and in many ways, sort of my spirituality. And so I really connect to landscapes and use them, I think, to recharge and to sort of get away from the daily struggles of life that we all go through. And oftentimes I find myself in wilderness areas because I like going way back there. Matter of fact, I was just in Canyonlands and Arches last week, and my good friend and I, who's from the Husby Res, we spent some time way back in the backcountry. And when you're walking out there, all of a sudden you'll just come across a petroglyph panel or a pictograph panel or some sort of storehouse or granary up in the cliffs, and you'll just kind of wonder about it. So sort of that sense of awe and wonder you get when you're out in the wilderness, and you can sort of either reconnect to reality or escape from reality, I suppose, the way, depending how you look at it. And so I think that aspect needs to be a little bit more defined, that wilderness areas are cultural landscapes as well, often. And I think we should go out and talk to more people like Mark and to people who have, been connected to these areas for so long. For like example, the San Francisco Peaks in Flagstaff, they have the Kachina Peaks Wilderness Area on the top of them. And that peak is considered a sacred mountain to many of the tribes in that region, and to the Navajos as well. It's our western sacred mountain, the western mountain of Diné, our homeland. So it's a special place for us, and the fact that it's protected, I think, is really important and good. So I think that value set, in a respectful way, I think should be explored more.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I think for us in our work is definitely connecting people to nature. I think looking at wilderness as a leadership development tool, as a movement building tool. We need to connect more people to nature, and wilderness it's the incubator, right? Like for us, and I've seen that where that experience in the wilderness areas definitely changes people to want to advocate for not only that specific area but for the environment. So there are challenges. I think we need to sort of be cautious on protecting wilderness. Yes, we need to do that, but we also need to increase access just to make sure that we're creating more leaders for it. And I think if you look at it that way, greater and equal access to these areas is a good thing, because more people are going to want to protect it. So if we want to build the next generation of environmental leaders, wilderness areas is that powerful incubator that we need to definitely pay attention to, and definitely prioritize those leaders coming from low-income communities, indigenous communities of color. They're the ones that, especially indigenous communities, right? Like they're the original caretakers of the land, and like you mentioned, right? It's the cultural heritage sites that must be open. So I think and I've been seeing that a lot, where folks are a little bit worried about the need to create greater and equal access for areas that are sensitive habitats, and there is definitely a balance. So, and the importance of creating leaders, right? Like the programming, I think, that comes with exposing people to the outdoors and exposing people to wilderness. It allows people to talk about it. Even in our cities, there's still not a lot of people that know what wilderness is. And yeah, you should have access to wilderness. You should be able to experience that at least once in your life. If you don't like it, then that's fine, right? But it's your human right. It's a civil right to have access specifically to wilderness.
Thank you. Megan?
It is hard for me to choose between those. I think they are all so critical, and I say that specifically coming at this from a perspective of working in the Southeast. But I will echo some of the things that Rob mentioned, and I think a fact that really stood out to me when I learned it, when we look at opportunities to connect people with nature, especially connecting people with nature in our region, more than half of the American population lives within a day's drive of the Southern Appalachians, and it is one of the most incredible resources we have in the United States, and one of the most incredible resources in the world, not just from a nature perspective and connecting humans, also from a biodiversity perspective. So many opportunities there. So I think coming at this from the perspective of somebody who is focused on eastern wilderness areas, I think there is, because of the population pressures we see in the east, both a need for wilderness areas, especially as we look in the southeast, because of the kind of long history of extractive industries and logging that we have seen in the southeast. You have that need more than ever, and I think combined with the fact that it's just a huge opportunity to bring in and create access to people and allow people to connect with nature, and kind of echoing what Rob said, kind of from my personal perspective, and I suspect a lot of the folks in this room would say the same. The reason a lot of us are here is because of an experience we had at some point in childhood or in early adulthood of connecting with nature, and those connections are what made us want to step up and speak out and work to protect these places. And so I think it's critical as we're looking at younger generations that we are making sure to provide that access and provide those experiences. So I will focus on that, but also hate to leave out any of the other values, because equally important. But.
Well, Megan, you're kind of a mind reader, and it leads into our next question that I have for you. So you kind of addressed some of it already. You know, wilderness, it creates these unconnected islands, you know, with these protected places. And you mentioned the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge and the wilderness area, and that this is some of this work is occurring outside of wilderness boundaries. Can you kind of just share with us a little bit more of why it's important to advocate more on this expansive landscape scale level beyond wilderness, and, you know, with some of these coalitions looking at it that way?
Sure. So just a very short background here. With the Okefenokee, what we are working on, the Okefenokee is one of the, I think it's the third largest wilderness area in the East. It's the largest national wildlife refuge. And it is absolutely, for those who have not had the opportunity to visit, which I suspect is a lot of y'all because it is in remote South Georgia, but it's stunning. It is a wetland ecosystem unlike anywhere you'll find in the world. And unlike some of the other kind of large-scale wetlands ecosystems we see, it's largely pristine. It's the source of rivers rather than the recipient, so it's avoided a lot of those upstream disturbances that have unfortunately plagued places like the Everglades. So we're looking at a really, just the ecological integrity of it is spectacular. But what we're seeing, there is a proposed mine right on the eastern boundary of the swamp. It's a heavy mineral sand mine. So essentially what they do there, they dig down between 50 and 75 feet, extract all of the soil and sands, take the minerals out, put them back in. It also involves taking a huge amount of groundwater. And there's obviously the impacts from outside the boundaries to inside the boundaries that we might think of. So light, sound, species going over the boundaries, but one of the ones that we don't necessarily think of, groundwater. The groundwater taking it out from outside the boundaries is impacting the water table inside the swamp. I know for a lot of y'all coming from the West, the idea of having water issues in a swamp in South Georgia is hard to contemplate, but it's hugely impactful. Part of the reason is because the Okefenokee is a massive peatland. It is the largest store of peat anywhere on the Atlantic coastal plain, which is running from Massachusetts all the way down to Mexico. And so even lowering the water table by a few inches releases a tremendous amount of carbon as that peat dries up. The peat is essentially a precursor to coal. It stores a ton of carbon and creates all sorts of risks of unnatural wildfires. So I mean, I think the big takeaway is if we are going to protect our wilderness areas, we have to be paying attention to what's going on outside the boundaries of those wilderness areas, because those are so many of the threats we're seeing, what's happening outside, and making sure that we are maintaining that and working with agencies where we can. And we've been really encouraged to see the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service coming out and asserting their reserved water rights for the first time in the East, and kind of seeing the agencies recognizing these threats outside the boundaries and how they are impacting land within the boundaries. And yeah, so I think that is the takeaway, is that there's lots of outside impacts, and it has been inspiring to see how many different groups have come together as part of, we've got a coalition called the Okefenokee Protection Alliance, almost 50 groups that have come together to protect this, have driven over 250,000 comments, which for a individual project in Georgia is unprecedented when we are looking at a place in South Georgia. So
thank you for that hard work, and also thank you for sharing the perspective on why protecting outside of wilderness is as important as protecting the wilderness, because it's all affected in a way. Mark, I have a question for you. Despite the Wilderness Act's lack of acknowledgement of Indigenous people in its text, you have been successful in securing support from tribal nations for conservation and wild places and wilderness proposals. What does your work tell the wilderness movement about the kind of political power that we need to build?
Navajos have always been aware of the power to address the unique situation of the wilderness and environmental issues. In 1968, in Bluff, Utah, Bobby Kennedy came to meet with the Navajos, and the families that came to meet with Bobby Kennedy, I remember talking to him about bear's ears, the need to protect that. And I was just a very young man at the time, and I often think about it and think, I wish we would have talked to him about the 8 million acre wilderness land at that time. But nevertheless, the sad thing is that fall, he was assassinated. And for your information, he wasn't crazy like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So during the course of my work on conservation, I met with the Tribal Council, Navajo Nation Council. There's 88 members, a large council delegate, and I asked them to support the Red Rock Wilderness, and it was amazing to see these Navajo leaders say, we want to pass a legislation to support the Red Rock Wilderness, and the legislation in Window Rock passed with unanimous vote. So that's how much support we have regarding wilderness. And we also got support from the Zuni and the Hopi tribe, and we're working on the other tribes in the Southwest. So eventually we'll probably get the entire tribe from the West supporting this, the wilderness bill.
Excellent, thank you. When you're moderator, you have a hard job, and that's making sure that we are respectful of everyone's time in the room and their expertise. As much as I want to dive into 10 minutes of questions right now, as we have it written on paper, I want to be respectful of everyone's time because you chose to come here tonight. However, you are going to have an opportunity after we're done in just a couple of minutes to meet with these incredible panelists, to ask the questions that you have to them directly, and maybe fingers crossed I can be persuasive enough, and so can our coalition, to maybe have a Zoom webinar in the future with these panelists and other experts so we can get those questions and we can continue the dialogue. At Cradle Broads for Wilderness, when we wrap up an event or something that we call broad walks, we end with a session where we ask people one word to describe your experience. And I am going to ask our panelists right now, when you think of wilderness and our wild places, what is the one word that comes to your mind?
What comes to my mind is survival of the next generation.
Thank you.
Replenishment.
Sacred.
Inspiration.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I want to give a very big thank you to all of our panelists. I also want to take a moment and acknowledge and say thank you to everyone who has helped put on our first annual, because I know we're going to do this again, Wilderness Week. Thank you to the coalition. Thank you to everyone who has volunteered time, who has come out here and put in the hard hours. It was a success, and we are going to continue to grow from these successes. At our organization, we use the phrase to be bold. That is what I am calling on each and every one of you to do today. Be bold. Continue to be bold. We are being bold by sharing our message. We are being bold by standing up for the right things to do. We are being bold to make sure that every voice is heard in the room. We are bold by putting our necks on the line. We are being bold because we love these wild places across the country, and we want to make sure that they are here for future generations. So thank you for that. Make sure that you tell your colleagues and the other nonprofits and organizations that you know about this coalition. Our website just went live a few weeks ago, and we are already getting requests from new organizations to join, and that is a success. Our meetings on the Hill this week, they were a success. They know we are a coalition to be listened to. We are going to continue to build champions for wilderness, and the next 60 years, we are going to shape to be something great. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening.